The soup was ready by noon, and nobody was coming. I knew it before I lifted the lid. Knew it the way you know a thing you have been knowing for a long time but keep choosing not to say out loud. The navy bean soup, my mother's recipe, the one I have made every Mother's Day since she passed, was sitting on that stove filling my kitchen with a smell that belonged to a different kind of day. A day with voices in it. Footsteps. A son walking through a door. My name is Theloise Treadwell. I am 58 years old. I live alone in Columbus, Ohio, and on this particular Sunday, I had been awake since 6 in the morning, doing what mothers do. Preparing, making space, making the day worth arriving to. By 10, I had checked my phone twice. By noon, I had stopped counting. I ate at my kitchen table alone. I washed my bowl. I sat in my good chair by the window and watched the afternoon move across the yard, the way light does when there is nothing urgent asking for your attention. A neighbor walked her dog. A car passed slow. The street had that particular Sunday quiet that usually feels peaceful, but that afternoon felt like something pressing down. I told myself Quincy was busy. I told myself Yvette probably had plans for her side of the family, and the day just got away from him. I told myself a lot of things between noon and evening that I had no real evidence for. By 7 o'clock, I stopped telling myself anything. I took a shower, I put on my house clothes. I turned the television on and watched it without watching it, the way you use noise to keep a room from feeling too empty. Before I got into bed, I checked my phone one final time, not because I expected anything, just because I am still a mother and mothers check. Nothing. I set the phone on my nightstand face down and lay in the dark and let myself be honest, for exactly the length of time it takes to breathe in and breathe out slowly, 3 times. This was not the first time. Mother's Day. 3 years ago, nothing. The year before that, a text at 9:40 in the evening that said, "Hope your day was good," with no punctuation and no call attached to it. And now this. A 3rd year of silence from the only child I raised alone from the time he was 9 years old. The only child I worked double shifts for. The only child whose name I signed on documents that made his life possible, in ways he has never once asked me about. I want to be clear about something. I am not a woman who performs suffering. I did not cry that night. I simply lay in the dark and allowed myself to understand what I was actually looking at. Not one forgotten Sunday, but a pattern, a choice, repeated. A son who had decided, somewhere along the way, that I did not require his consideration. I filed that understanding away, and I went to sleep. I had no idea that by the next morning I would have confirmation I was not prepared for. Not of neglect, but of something with edges sharp enough to cut through 26 years of patience in a single sentence. If you are watching this late at night or early in the morning, drop the time in the comments. You are exactly who I made this for. I did not know yet what was coming. But the woman who woke up the next morning was already different from the one who went to sleep. I found out on a Monday. I was still in my housecoat, first cup of coffee barely touched, when I opened Facebook the way I do most mornings, out of habit more than interest. I was not looking for anything. I was not expecting anything. I was just a woman scrolling through her phone at her kitchen table on an ordinary Monday morning. Then I stopped scrolling. Quincy had posted a photo the night before. He was standing with Clementine Sloan, Yvette's mother, his arm around her shoulders, his face open and warm, in a way I have not seen directed at me in longer than I care to count. They were dressed well, both of them smiling like the picture was taken at something that mattered. The caption read, "The best mothers look good, dress well, and are educated." Underneath it, the first like on the post, Yvette. I read it once. I read it again. Not because I misunderstood it, because I wanted to be absolutely certain I was reading what I was reading. I set my phone face down on the table. I sat there. The coffee went cold. The kitchen was quiet in a way that felt different from yesterday's quiet. Yesterday was empty, but this was something with weight too. I was not crying. I was not shaking. I was doing something I have learned to do over the course of a life that required it. I was being still while my mind worked. I thought about what I looked like. A woman who spent 30 years in other people's homes caring for their elderly parents before she ever built something of her own. A woman who never finished college, never owned a designer anything, who raised her son on overtime pay and covered casseroles brought to the door by church ladies. I thought about whether any of that made me less of a mother. I already knew the answer. I just needed to sit with the fact that my own son had decided differently, and had said so publicly with a smile on his face, the morning after he did not call me. I sat at that table for close to an hour. Then I picked my phone back up. I did not call Quincy. I had nothing to say to him that words could carry properly. I did not call Yvette. Whatever she understood about that post or did not understand, she had made her position clear with one tap of her finger. I scrolled to Curtis Gilchrist. Curtis has handled every piece of property I have ever owned. He drew up the original lease on the Caldwell Avenue building 7 years ago. He knows that property the way he knows his own files. Every clause, every renewal, every date. I have never called him for anything that was not serious, and he has never treated me like anything less than a woman who knows exactly what she is doing. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I needed to move on the Caldwell lease. I kept my voice even because there was nothing to be uneven about. This was not emotion. This was a property decision that I had the full legal right to make. Curtis was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "I'll have something drafted by Thursday." I said, "Thank you, Curtis." I hung up. I poured the cold coffee out and made a fresh cup. I stood at my kitchen window and drank it while it was still hot. I had no idea that by Thursday, Quincy would already be making calls of his own, and that not one of them would be to apologize. People look at what I have now and assume I married into it or inherited it or had someone hand it to me. Nobody handed me anything. I started doing home health aid work when Quincy was 11 years old. Early mornings, late evenings, other people's parents in other people's houses, bathing them, feeding them, sitting with them through the kind of slow decline that families find too hard to watch up close. I did that work for 22 years, not because it was easy, because it paid consistently and I needed consistent. Raymond had been gone since Quincy was 9, left for a woman in Dayton without a conversation, without a forwarding address, without a backward glance at the boy he helped make. I did not have the luxury of falling apart over that. I had a son who needed lunch money and school shoes and someone to show up. So I showed up every single day, in every way that mattered. I saved the way poor people save. Slowly, carefully, with full knowledge that one emergency could erase months of discipline. I kept a notebook, not a spreadsheet, not an app, just a composition notebook where I tracked every dollar that went into my savings account. That notebook has my fingerprints worn into the cover. By the time Quincy was in his mid-20s, I had enough to move. I found the Morse Road property on a Tuesday, drove past it 3 times before I stopped. Small commercial building, needed work, but the bones were solid and the price was honest. I bought it. I spent 8 months converting it. New flooring, proper lighting, a commercial kitchen, a certified medication room. I got my facility license from the state of Ohio. I named it Treadwell Adult Daycare because I built it, and my name was going on it. Woodrow helped me move equipment in on opening day. He has known me since my mother was alive. An older man from the neighborhood, steady and quiet. The kind of person who shows up with his truck and his back and does not require you to explain yourself. When the last piece of furniture was in place, he looked around and said, "Your mama would have been proud." Thelois. I had to step outside for a minute after that. Treadwell has been running for going on 9 years now. I have 6 full-time staff, 14 regular clients, and a reputation in this part of Columbus that I earned one family at a time. Nobody gave me that either. I say all of this not to impress anyone. I say it because it matters for what comes later, because there is a version of this story where people look at what I did and call it extreme or bitter or an overreaction. I want those people to understand exactly what kind of woman they are looking at before they finish forming that opinion. I am a woman who built something from nothing, twice. A woman who held a family together alone for decades without applause. A woman who signed her name on a piece of property so her son could have a foundation, and asked for nothing in return except basic, human consideration. Quincy had a business partner named Stafford Presswood. I had met him twice at family gatherings. Pleasant man, professional, the kind of person who shakes your hand firmly and remembers your name. I never thought much about him beyond that. I would think about him a great deal later. But that Thursday, when Curtis's letter went out, I was not thinking about Stafford Presswood or anyone else connected to Quincy's world. I was thinking about what my son was going to do when that envelope arrived. 5 years ago, Quincy came to me with a problem. His freight brokerage was growing. He had clients, he had contracts, he had ambition, but he had an address problem. The location he had been using for his federal licensing registration had complications he never fully explained to me. What he explained was the outcome. He needed a legitimate principal place of business, properly titled, properly documented, or his operating authority was at risk. He did not come asking for money. He came asking for help navigating it. But with Quincy, those two things were always the same thing. He just preferred when I arrived at the solution myself, so he never had to say the word directly. I found the Caldwell Avenue property within 2 weeks. Single-story commercial building, solid condition, reasonable price for that part of Columbus. I bought it outright. Then I called Curtis and had him draw up a formal lease agreement between me as property owner and Quincy's brokerage as tenant. $150 a month. I want you to understand what that number means. Commercial property on Caldwell Avenue was leasing at $12 to $15 per square foot at the time. Similar spaces in that area rented for several $1,000s a month depending on size and use. What I charged my son was not market rent. The building was already paid for, and I intentionally carried almost all of the real cost myself because he was my son. What I charged him was ceremonial. It was a hand extended. It was me saying, "Here, I am making this possible for you, and all I am asking is that we do this properly so it is protected for both of us." Quincy signed the lease. Curtis filed everything correctly. The brokerage updated its federal registration to the Caldwell address, and the licensing issue was resolved. The first 6 months, the payments came in. After that, they became irregular. A month skipped here, 2 months there, then they stopped entirely. Quincy never raised it, never said, "Mama, I am behind. Let me catch up." Never offered an explanation or an adjusted arrangement. He simply stopped paying and continued operating out of that building as though the matter had resolved itself quietly. I never pushed it. I told myself I was being a mother. I told myself the building was already paid for and $150 was not going to change my life. I told myself a lot of things that were technically true but practically amounted to the same thing. I was absorbing something I should not have been absorbing, and I was calling it love to make it easier to swallow. The lease renewed month to month by default. That is standard. When a fixed-term lease expires and neither party acts on it, it simply continues on a rolling monthly basis. Curtis had structured it that way intentionally, knowing I might need flexibility one day. At the time, I thought that was just good legal practice. I understand now it was also preparation I did not know I was making. Quincy never once asked to buy the building, never offered to take over the title, never suggested a formal transfer of any kind. He operated out of that property for 5 years as though ownership was a thing that happened naturally over time. Like if you use something long enough, it eventually became yours. His freight license lived at that address. His client contracts referenced it. His entire professional identity was registered there, and the deed had my name on it. Every single day for 5 years, my name sat on that deed while he built his reputation on top of it. Curtis knew every clause in that lease, every renewal date, every unpaid month. When I called him Monday morning and said I needed to move on the Caldwell lease, he did not need me to explain a single thing. He already knew exactly what moving on it would mean. Thursday came the way Curtis said it would. I was at Treadwell when he called, standing in the activity room watching 2 of my residents work a puzzle together, a thing they did every Thursday morning without fail. Curtis's voice was steady and professional, the way it always is. He told me the notice had gone out, certified mail, delivered to the Caldwell Avenue address directly. He read me the key language over the phone: month-to-month tenancy, lapsed payment history, 60 days to vacate, vacate date, stated plainly. I thanked him and put my phone back in my pocket. 60 days. I want to be clear about that number because it matters. Ohio law requires 30 days notice to terminate a month-to-month commercial tenancy. I gave him 60. Twice what the law required. Not because I was uncertain, because I am not a cruel woman, and I never have been. I gave my son 2 full months to find a solution, relocate his registration, update his licensing, and handle his business like the grown man he has always claimed to be. What I did not give him was an apology for doing it. Curtis had written the notice cleanly. No emotional language, no explanation beyond the legal facts, the tenancy status, the payment history, the vacate date. That was intentional. I had not asked him to explain my reasons or justify my decision. A property owner terminating a month-to-month lease does not owe her tenant her interior life. She owes him proper notice. He had it. I stayed at Treadwell the rest of that afternoon. I checked on my residents the way I do every day, made sure the afternoon medication round was documented, sat with a woman named Mrs. Patton, who had been having a hard week, walked the facility once before the evening shift came in. There is something grounding about that work. It has always brought me back to myself when the rest of life gets loud. That afternoon, it was not loud. That afternoon, everything inside me was very, very quiet. I thought about the Caldwell Avenue building, thought about the afternoon I first walked through it, the way the light came through the front windows, the smell of an empty commercial space that had not been used in a while. I thought about signing those purchase documents and feeling the particular satisfaction of a woman who built something from discipline and patience. I thought about Quincy's name on that lease, his signature at the bottom, the date. I thought about the fact that for 5 years that building had held his professional life like a cup holds water, and he had never once looked down to see whose hands were holding the cup. Now I had set the cup down. What he did with that information in the next 60 days was entirely his business. He could relocate quietly. He could update his federal registration, find a new address, move his operation, and handle it like a professional. That path was completely open to him. I was not naive enough to believe he would take it. I have known my son for 34 years. I know what he does when he feels cornered. I know what his father did. I know what that particular combination of pride and panic looks like when it starts moving through a man who has never once been held accountable for the space he takes up in other people's lives. By the time I pulled out of the Treadwell parking lot that evening, the notice had been sitting at Caldwell Avenue for several hours. Somewhere across Columbus, my son was about to read it. I know the exact moment he read it. He called my phone at 4:47 in the afternoon. I know the time because I was pulling into my driveway when the screen lit up with his name. The first time I had seen it in longer than I should have accepted. I sat in my car and watched it ring. Then I watched it stop. I went inside and put my keys on the hook by the door. He called again at 4:51, then again at 5:03. I let all three go. Not out of spite. I want to be clear about that. I let them go because there was nothing productive in that conversation yet. A man who has just received a legal notice and immediately starts calling is not calling to reflect. He is calling to reverse, and there was nothing to reverse. I learned what happened next from Woodrow, who told me later in the careful way he tells things. Just the facts. No decoration. Quincy called Stafford Presswood first. Stafford had apparently read the notice himself. Quincy had forwarded it. And his response was immediate and practical. He told Quincy to call an attorney before he did anything else. Stafford was not warm about it. He was not cold, either. He was a businessman looking at a legal document and responding accordingly. Then, Quincy called Woodrow. He did not call Woodrow for legal advice. Quincy has always believed that Woodrow has a particular influence over me, that there is some version of a conversation Woodrow could have with me that would shift my position on anything. He has believed this since he was a teenager. He has never been right about it, but he has never stopped believing it either. What Quincy forgot was that Woodrow already knew more than he realized. He knew about the Mother's Day silence. He knew about the Facebook post because I had shown it to him the day after I saw it. He knew the Caldwell building belonged to me. He knew I had spent years excusing things I should not have excused because I was trying to be a good mother. Woodrow listened to everything Quincy said. All of it. He did not interrupt. He did not push back in the moment. Quincy laid out the whole situation. The notice, the address, the licensing, the contracts, what it would mean for the business if the vacate date held. He told Woodrow this was going to cost him everything he had spent 5 years building. When Quincy finished, Woodrow was quiet for a moment. Then he said, low and without any particular judgment in his voice, "You know what you did. That was all." Quincy hung up. I thought about that when Woodrow told me. I thought about the silence on Quincy's end before the call ended. Not a silence that was forming a response, but a silence that had nothing left to reach for. Woodrow had not accused him of anything, had not listed anything, had not raised his voice or delivered a speech. He had simply said the one true thing. And the one true thing had nowhere to land except exactly where it belonged. The calls to my phone stopped after 5 o'clock. What I understood that evening, sitting in my kitchen with the television off and the house quiet around me, was that Quincy had now made contact with everyone he believed could help him. His partner, his uncle, his mother. And every single one of those conversations had returned him to the same place. The notice was real. The building was mine. The ground he had been standing on for 5 years had an owner, and the owner had made a decision. What I did not know that evening was what he planned to do next. But the fact that he had not once, across 3 phone calls and an entire afternoon, attempted to say the word sorry, that told me everything I needed to know about the direction this was heading. He knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. I saw his car from the window before I answered, parked at an angle the way he always parks when he is agitated, slightly crooked, like the urgency in his body transfers to everything around him. I stood at the window for a moment. Then I went to the door and opened it. He was dressed well. That was the first thing I noticed. Not casual, not like a man coming to have an honest conversation with his mother, but pressed and put together, like he had decided presentation was leverage. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the thing they do when he has already decided how a conversation is going to go before it begins. He did not say, "Good morning." He said, "We need to talk about this, Mama." I stepped back from the door to let him in. He came inside and stayed on his feet. I sat down. He talked for a long time. I let him. He told me I was being emotional. That word, emotional, delivered the way men deliver it when they want to reclassify your clarity as instability. He told me I was punishing him over a social media post, as though the post existed in isolation, as though it had not arrived the morning after Mother's Day silence, as though it had not landed on top of 3 years of the same. He told me about his employees, 2 people on payroll. He told me about his clients, his contracts, what the address change would cost him in time and credibility. He laid it all out like a legal brief, like if the presentation was organized enough, it would override the fact that none of what he built belonged to him in the way he had always assumed. He did not say, "Sorry," not once, not even as a formality. And he said the word mother exactly twice, both times as a prefix to a demand, not a name he was using with any warmth behind it. I watched his face the whole time he was talking. I was not angry. I was not hurt. I was observing. And what I observed, underneath the pressed shirt and the organized argument and the controlled volume, was something I recognized from a long time ago. Raymond used to stand exactly like that. Same jaw, same certainty, same belief that if he stated his position with enough conviction, the other person was obligated to rearrange themselves around it. Raymond never apologized, either. He just repositioned and expected the world to follow. I had spent years following. When Quincy finished, I did not respond. I did not offer a counter-argument or an explanation or any indication that his presentation had moved anything inside me. I stood up from my chair. I walked to the door. I opened it. He looked at me. And for just a moment, something crossed his face that was not anger and was not confidence. It was the brief, unguarded look of a man realizing the conversation did not go the way he planned, and he does not have a next move prepared. I stepped back from the door. He walked out. I closed it behind him. Not hard. Not with ceremony. Just closed it the way you close a door when the business on the other side of it is finished. I walked back to my kitchen. I put the kettle on. Outside, I heard his car start, still at that crooked angle, and pull away from the curb. He had come to my door with a position instead of an apology. What he did not understand yet was that a position was not going to be enough, and that what came next would not be coming from me. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just after 7. I did not recognize the number at first. Clementine and I had spoken before, but never regularly. Never enough for her name to be saved in my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. She said, "Theloise, this is Clementine Sloan." Her voice was careful the way a person's voice gets when they have rehearsed their opening and are hoping the other person gives them room to finish it. I said, "I know who you are, Clementine. Go ahead." She exhaled once, then she talked. She told me she had been thinking about me since she heard what was happening. She said she wanted to call sooner, but kept deciding it was none of her business. Then she would think about it again and arrive at the same place. That sometimes decency requires you to step into something uncomfortable. She told me she had talked to a vet first, not for permission, just because she wanted to be sure she understood what had happened before she picked up the phone. Only then did she call me. She addressed the post directly. She told me she never saw it the way it landed, that nobody had told her about the Mother's Day silence, that she did not know the history sitting underneath that caption, that she had posed for that picture without any knowledge of what Quincy intended to write beneath it. She said she was sorry. Not the reflexive kind of sorry that people use to move past discomfort. She said it slowly, like she meant the specific thing she was apologizing for. Then she addressed Yvette. She told me Yvette had seen the post while scrolling quickly through her feed. She recognized her mother's face in the photo, assumed it was an ordinary Mother's Day post, and tapped like before, moving on. Later that evening, Clementine mentioned the picture during a conversation. That was when Yvette went back and actually read the caption. When Clementine sat down with her afterward and explained the Mother's Day silence that came before it, Yvette had gone quiet for a long time. Clementine said she did not want to put words in her daughter's mouth, and she was not calling to defend anyone. She simply wanted me to know that the like was not what it appeared to be. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I told her the truth. I said, "Clementine, there is no grievance between you and me. There never was." I meant that completely. This woman had not wronged me. She had smiled in a photograph, and her son-in-law had used it as a vehicle for something that had nothing to do with her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, gently, "Is there any room to work something out with Quincy?" I did not answer immediately. I wanted to give her question the respect it deserved because she had called me with genuine care, and I was not going to dismiss that. Then I said, "What's been set in motion is not about the post, Clementine. That post just helped me see clearly what I'd been choosing not to look at." She was quiet again. A different kind of quiet this time. The kind that means a person has understood something and is sitting with it rather than pushing against it. She said, "I hear you, Thelois." We talked for a few more minutes. Nothing heavy. She asked about Treadwell. I asked about her garden, which Yvette had mentioned once at a family dinner years ago. By the time we said goodbye, there was something between us that felt close to mutual respect. Two women on opposite sides of a situation, both trying to conduct themselves with dignity. I put the phone down and sat with the conversation. What Clementine had told me about Yvette settled something I had not realized was unsettled. But something else she said stayed with me longer, the way she had described Yvette going quiet. Not defensive, not dismissive. Quiet. The kind of quiet I recognized. The kind that means a woman is starting to look at something she has been avoiding. She walked in on a Wednesday morning carrying a clipboard. State Inspector, Ohio Department of Health, Compliance Division. She was professional and polite, and she introduced herself at the front desk the way inspectors do, calm, procedural, giving nothing away in her expression. She told my assistant director she was there to follow up on a filed complaint. Overcrowding, improper medication storage, inadequate staffing ratios. My assistant director came and got me from my office. I walked out, shook the inspector's hand, and told her she was welcome to see everything. I kept my voice even because there was nothing to be uneven about. The timing lodged itself in my mind immediately. The lease notice had gone out. Quincy had called. He had come to my door. He had run through every person he believed could change my mind. Now an inspector was standing in the lobby of the facility I had spent 22 years building. I did not know who filed the complaint. Not yet. But I had my suspicions. I want to tell you about something that happened when Quincy was 19 years old. He had borrowed my car without asking and put a scratch on the rear bumper. Small thing. When I asked him about it, he looked me directly in the eye and told me the scratch was already there when I gave him the keys. He did not flinch, did not look away, did not show a single flicker of discomfort while saying something he knew was completely untrue. It was the stillness that unsettled me. The way the lie sat in his face like it belonged there. I did not push it that day. I filed it away in the part of my mind where mothers store the things they notice but hope they are misreading. I was not misreading. What a man does when he is cornered tells you who he is underneath everything else he has shown you. Quincy had been to my door with a position and been met with a closed one. He had called people who returned him nothing useful. He had a vacant deadline closing in on him, and a business identity that depended on an address he no longer controlled. And now a complaint had appeared against the thing I valued most. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was not. The inspector spent 2 hours at Treadwell. She checked the medication room, locked, documented, logged correctly. She checked our staffing records against the client roster, ratios well within state requirements. She walked every room. My staff did not flinch because there was nothing to flinch about. Treadwell has been clean since the day I opened it, and it will be clean long after this is over. Before she left, she told me the complaint lacked substantiation. She was professional about it. I thanked her for her time. Then she said something else. Not enough to identify who filed it, not even close, but enough to stay with me. She mentioned that whoever submitted the complaint appeared unusually familiar with licensing terminology. Several of the allegations referenced internal compliance language that most families and members of the public would not normally use. She also noted that the complaint spent far more time discussing licensing records, registration requirements, and administrative procedures than resident care itself. Then she thanked me for my cooperation and left. I stood there thinking about that for a long moment. Licensing records, registration requirements, administrative procedures, the exact subjects Quincy had spent the past several weeks obsessing over. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it did not. But I could not ignore the overlap. I called Curtis from my office the moment she pulled out of the lot. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for exactly the length of time it takes a man to shift from attorney to strategist. Then he asked me 3 questions. Had the inspector mentioned resident complaints? No. Had she mentioned family concerns? No. Had she mentioned licensing language? Yes. The silence that followed was different. Then he said, "Document everything from today. Dates, times, her name, her findings. I want it all." I called Verdell next. She had been at the front desk for part of the inspection, and her jaw had been tight the entire time. When I told her who I suspected, she said, "Louise, that is your child." "I know," I told her. "That is exactly why the possibility won't leave me alone." What surprised me, what I was not fully prepared for, was the call I received 3 days later from Quincy himself. His voice carried something new in it, a controlled steadiness that did not sound like defeat. It sounded like a man who believed he had just found something to use. He called on a Friday afternoon. I was at my kitchen table going through Treadwell's weekly staffing schedule when my phone rang. Quincy. I looked at it for 1 full ring. Then I answered. Because I had said everything I needed to say with a closed door, and I was curious what direction a man like my son would move when that stopped working. His voice was different from the last time. The Saturday morning urgency was gone. What replaced it was something more measured, a controlled steadiness that had clearly been practiced before he dialed. He told me the ODH inspection had uncovered a procedural filing discrepancy in Treadwell's 2021 license renewal documentation. He said it carefully, like a man reading from notes. He told me the state had flagged it as an unresolved administrative item. Then he paused. The deliberate kind of pause that is meant to let weight settle. He said he was prepared to pursue that discrepancy formally if I did not withdraw the lease termination. I let him finish completely. Every word. Then I said, "That matter was resolved with the state earlier this week, Quincy. Curtis handled it." The silence that followed was not a thinking silence. It was the silence of a man whose entire prepared position had just been removed from underneath him in a single sentence. I did not fill it. I let it sit exactly as long as it needed to. Then I said, "Take care of yourself." And I hung up. The discrepancy itself had been minor, a paperwork issue, nothing operational, nothing involving resident care. What Quincy did not know was that Curtis had not simply filed one document and moved on. He had spent several days working directly with the licensing office, pulling archived records, responding to follow-up requests, and making sure every piece of documentation matched the state's file before the matter was formally closed. By the time Quincy called me with it as leverage, there was nothing left to leverage. 2 days later, he filed a civil suit. He claimed the lease termination was retaliatory and unlawful, that I had acted because of a personal dispute rather than legitimate property grounds. Curtis received the filing and reviewed it that afternoon. Later, he sent me a short note. 1 line. He filed this against the advice of whoever he consulted. I read that line twice and set it down. A man with a competent attorney does not build a retaliatory termination claim around a month-to-month lease, years of documented non-payment, and a notice period longer than the law requires. The filing did not alarm Curtis. It concerned him for a different reason. It suggested Quincy had stopped listening to people who knew what they were talking about. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That is important. Things did not collapse overnight. They eroded. The federal registration attached to Quincy's brokerage still needed to be updated before the lease termination took effect. That process should have been routine. Instead, it became another item competing for his attention while he was focused on litigation. Questions started appearing. Deadlines started getting missed. Stafford Presswood noticed first. According to Woodrow, Stafford spent several weeks trying to convince Quincy to focus on stabilizing the business rather than fighting me. Those conversations eventually turned into meetings with accountants, attorneys, and their operations manager. Everybody seemed to be having the same conversation from a different angle. The conversations did not go well. Then came discussions about separating their interests in the company. Those did not go well either. Eventually, Stafford ended the partnership. Not because of one lawsuit, not because of one disagreement, because he no longer trusted Quincy to make decisions that served the company instead of his pride. That departure mattered. Then came the contract loss. Harlan Caldwell's company had worked with Quincy's brokerage for years. The account was valuable, but not irreplaceable. What mattered was the signal it sent. Clients do not like uncertainty. They do not like licensing questions. They do not like hearing that business partners are leaving. One client leaving is an inconvenience. Multiple concerns arriving at the same time become something else. In Columbus logistics, people pay attention, not loudly, quietly, the way business communities always do. Quincy had entered that season believing he had finally found leverage. Instead, he found consequences that did not care what he believed. The lawsuit continued forward. The lease termination remained in place. The business pressures kept building. And for the first time since all of this started, I began to wonder whether my son understood how much of what was happening had nothing to do with me anymore. I was not in that room. I want to be clear about that. What I know about what happened between Yvette and Quincy that evening. I know the way you know things that happen at the edge of your life, through the quality of silence that follows, through what people do not say, through the particular way a situation shifts after a conversation you were not present for. Yvette had been watching everything unfold. She had heard from her mother after Clementine and I spoke. She had seen the court filing, Quincy's name on a civil suit against the woman who owned the building his business operated from. She had watched the situation grow stranger week by week. The complaint filed against my facility had arrived only days after he received the lease notice. Then came the lawsuit. Then the licensing problems. Then the explanations that seemed to change depending on who was asking the questions. She is not a foolish woman. She never was. And from what Clementine later told me, Yvette had not started asking questions that week. She had been asking them quietly for some time. Small questions at first. Questions about the building, about the lease, about why every version of the story seemed to place responsibility somewhere other than where it belonged. The answers never seemed to settle anything. They only led to more questions. From what I understand, she sat with him one evening and asked him plainly, "When did you stop being someone I recognize?" Quincy did not answer the question. He told her she did not understand the pressure he was under. Business pressure, financial pressure, the stress of what was happening with his licensing. He laid it out the way he laid things out at my door. Organized, positioned, delivered as though the presentation itself was a substitute for actually hearing what was being asked. Yvette told him she understood exactly what she was seeing. That was when he turned cold. I know that coldness. I have described it in this story already because I watched it move across my son's face at my own front door. It is not anger, exactly. Anger has heat in it. Anger can shift. This is something else. This is a door closing from the inside. A man deciding that the person in front of him has become an obstacle rather than a partner and adjusting his posture accordingly. Yvette felt it. I know she did, because I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of it, and I know what a woman looks like after she has felt it from someone she trusted. She did not leave that night. She stayed. She probably made dinner or cleared dishes or did the ordinary things people do in a house that is still technically functioning while something essential inside it has already stopped. But I know, the way I know things about women who have reached a particular place in themselves, that something settled in her that evening. Not because of one argument, not because of one lawsuit, because sometimes a single conversation simply confirms what weeks of observation have already been trying to tell you. The decision was already forming in that room, not announced, not argued into existence, just forming quietly, the way serious decisions do when a woman has finally seen enough. I have seen that look in my own mirror, years ago, after Raymond. The morning I woke up and understood that I was not waiting for something to get better anymore. I was simply deciding what came next. There is a stillness to it that looks like calm from the outside, but is actually something closer to finality. Yvette had that stillness now. What I did not know was how quickly things would move once she started moving. I did not know about the call Quincy made 3 days later, not to me, not to Curtis, not to anyone connected to the legal situation. He called Verdell. He called my closest friend and asked her to carry a message he did not have the courage to bring himself. And what he said to her, and what she said back, told me that my son had finally run out of every option except the one he had refused from the beginning. Verdell called me on a Thursday morning. I knew from her first word that the call was not hers. Verdell has a particular way of opening a conversation. Direct, warm, no preamble. That morning she started with my name and then paused, and that pause told me everything before she said another word. She told me Quincy had reached out to her the night before. She said he had asked her to talk to me. She delivered this the way an honest person delivers something they are not entirely comfortable carrying, plainly, without editorializing, because she respected me enough not to dress it up. I asked her one question. Did he apologize? Verdell was quiet. Not the quiet of someone searching for words. The quiet of someone who already has the answer and is deciding whether softening it serves anyone. It did not. I said, "Then there is nothing to discuss, Verdell. I love you for calling." She said, "I know, baby. I know." We hung up. She did not contact Quincy again. I know this not because I asked her to cut him off. I would never ask that of anyone. I know it because Verdell is a woman who understands when she has been used as an instrument, and she does not make herself available for that twice. Quincy had gone through every channel available to him. His mother's door, his uncle, a civil court, a state licensing board, and now my closest friend. Every single one had returned him to the same place, a man who had not apologized, reaching for outcomes that an apology was the only real path to. The following week, Yvette met with an attorney. I did not know that at the time. I learned it later through Clementine. Not details. Clementine is not the kind of woman who shares her daughter's private business, but enough to understand that Yvette had not acted suddenly. She had been watching for weeks, asking questions, looking at things she had previously chosen not to examine too closely. 4 days after that consultation, Yvette filed for divorce. I found out through Clementine, who sent me a text message that said simply, "I'm sorry, Thelois, for all of it." I read it twice and set my phone down and sat with what it meant. Yvette's filing did not just end a marriage. It ended a relationship that had quietly connected Quincy to a larger professional network for years. The Sloan family had never run his business for him. They had never handed him contracts or guaranteed success. Quincy built much of what he built through his own work. But family relationships create opportunities. Introductions happen. People meet over dinners. A recommendation gets made. A conversation that might not have happened otherwise suddenly does. Those things matter. He was no longer family. Every opportunity that existed because of that relationship did not disappear overnight. Nobody organized against him. Nobody made calls. Nobody closed ranks. What disappeared was future access. The casual introductions. The automatic goodwill. The benefit of being connected to people who were willing to vouch for him because he belonged to the family. Quietly, without announcement, those things simply stopped being available. Quincy called Clementine the day after the filing. She did not answer. He called again the following morning. She did not answer that time either. Not out of cruelty. I know Clementine well enough to know that. But there are moments when a woman understands that answering a call will not help the person calling and will only cost her something she is not prepared to spend. He had lost 2 foundations in the same season. The building that held his business, the marriage that held much of his personal stability. Both gone. Both lost, not because someone came after him, but because of choices he made, movements he initiated, words he never said. I thought about that for a long time the night Clementine's text came through. I thought about a man running out of road and still not understanding that the road ended because of the direction he chose. And I thought about the fact that somewhere in Columbus, my son was sitting with all of that. And the one person who might have steadied him had a closed door between them that he had closed himself. What came next was the part nobody saw coming, not even me. Curtis's letter arrived on a Tuesday. I read it at my kitchen table the way I read everything important. Slowly, once, without rushing toward the conclusion. The ODH complaint officially dismissed, the civil suit thrown out, all legal matters resolved in full. Curtis's closing line was characteristically plain. The record is clean. Theloise. It always was. I set the letter down. I sat with it for a while, not with satisfaction exactly. Something quieter than that. The feeling of a door closing on a room you had been forced to stand in. Not relief that the room is gone. Just the simple fact of it being finished. I had not wanted any of this. Not the inspection, not the lawsuit, not the months of legal correspondence sitting in a folder on my kitchen counter. I had wanted a son who called on Mother's Day. What I had instead was a clean record and a closed case. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and went to make tea. That same week, without telling me, Woodrow went to see Quincy. He did not ask my permission, did not mention he was going. He just went, the way Woodrow does things, quietly, on his own judgment, because he decided it needed doing. He told me about it afterward. Quincy was in a smaller apartment now. Temporary, clearly, the kind of place a person lands in when their life is being reorganized against their expectations. Sparse furniture, boxes that had not been fully unpacked, a stack of paperwork on the table that Woodrow said looked like someone trying to rebuild something from the pieces left after a collapse. Woodrow sat across from him. He did not deliver a speech, did not walk Quincy through the list of everything he had done, the post, the door, the complaint, the lawsuit, the calls that went nowhere because they were never accompanied by the one thing that might have changed any of it. Woodrow is not built for speeches, and he knows it. He sat in that sparse apartment and he looked at his nephew and he let the silence do the work that silence does when two people are being honest. Then he said, "Your mother never stopped loving you. She just stopped accepting less than she deserved." Quincy did not respond. He looked at the table, not away, not out the window, at the table. The way a person looks at something fixed when everything else feels like it is still moving. Woodrow sat a moment longer. Then he got up, patted Quincy once on the shoulder, and left. He told me about the visit the following Sunday. We were sitting on my back porch, the way we sometimes do on Sunday evenings when neither of us has anywhere to be. He told it plainly, without editorializing, the same way he does everything. When he finished, I did not say anything for a while. I thought about Quincy at that table. Thought about what it cost Woodrow to walk into that apartment and sit across from a man who had made choices that hurt people Woodrow loved, and not say a single word in anger. Just the one true thing, offered without conditions. Then I said, "Thank you, Woodrow." He nodded. He picked up his glass. We sat on that porch until the light changed and the yard went quiet and there was nothing left that needed saying between us. The legal chapter was closed. The family chapter was something else entirely. Not closed, not open. Just sitting the way certain things sit when they are too large for a simple resolution and too important to be abandoned. What I knew was that I had a trip to take. One I had been postponing for 11 years. We left Columbus on a Friday morning before the heat settled in. Verdell drove the first stretch and I handled the second. And somewhere past the Tennessee state line, we stopped at a gas station that sold boiled peanuts out of a slow cooker by the register. And we ate them in the parking lot like two women who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. That was the first moment I felt it. Something loosening in my chest that I had not realized was tight. We reached Savannah by early evening. The hotel was on the riverside, 4 floors up. And when I walked out onto the balcony for the first time and looked at the Savannah River sitting wide and brown and unhurried below me, I stood there for a long time without saying anything. The air smelled like salt water and something green and old. The low country in early summer, thick and warm and completely indifferent to anything I had been carrying for the past several months. It did not know about lease terminations or state inspectors or civil suits. It was just air, just water, just the particular quiet of a place that has been there long before your trouble arrived and will be there long after it leaves. Verdell came and stood beside me and said, "Theloise, we should have done this years ago." I told her, yes, we should have. We ate dinner that first night on River Street. I ordered shrimp and grits from a restaurant with exposed brick walls and candles on every table and a waitress who called us both honey without it feeling like anything other than genuine. The shrimp and grits arrived in a white bowl, rich and perfectly seasoned, and I ate every bit of it and did not think once about Treadwell's weekend staffing schedule, or the folder of legal correspondence on my kitchen counter, or anything else that lived inside my regular life. I just ate. I just sat. I just was. We stayed 4 days. On the second morning, I walked along the waterfront alone while Verdell slept in. I bought coffee from a cart near the market and walked slowly, the way you walk when you are not trying to get anywhere, when the walking itself is the point. I thought about the last time I had taken a trip just for myself, and I genuinely could not place it. There had always been something more urgent. Always Treadwell. Always a resident who needed extra attention. Always someone whose needs arrived before my own on a list I kept without being asked to. I had earned this. I knew that completely and without apology. On the third evening, Verdell said something at dinner. I did not even catch all of it. Something about the waitress's shoes. And I laughed. The full kind. The unguarded kind that starts in your stomach and arrives at your face before you have made any decision about it. I laughed until my eyes watered, And Verdell laughed at me laughing. And for a few minutes, we were just two women at a table in Georgia being ridiculous together. I could not remember the last time I had laughed like that. Treadwell was running smoothly under my assistant director. My license was clean. Both my buildings were mine. I was not waiting for anything. I was not managing anyone's crisis or absorbing anyone's choices or signing my name on anything for anyone who would forget it was there. I was a woman in her late 50s sitting above a river in Georgia. I had worked my whole life for exactly this kind of ordinary, beautiful, uninterrupted peace. I had finally stopped waiting for permission to take it. I came home from Savannah on a Tuesday. I unpacked slowly, put a load of laundry on, made myself a proper meal at my own stove. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the space around me. The counters I picked out, the window above the sink that faces the backyard, the hook by the door where my keys live. And I felt the particular satisfaction of a woman returning to something that belongs to her completely. No conditions, no extensions, just hers. I sat down that evening and let myself think clearly about everything that had happened. Quincy is in Columbus. I know this through Woodrow, who keeps a quiet eye without being asked to report anything. His broker authority is still under federal review. The partnership with Stafford Presswood is dissolved. The marriage is over. His name in the Columbus logistics community carries weight now, but not the kind that opens doors, the kind that makes people pause before returning a call. Woodrow told me something else. A man Quincy had done business with years ago ran into him recently and asked whether he had gotten everything sorted out. Not angrily, not accusingly, just casually. The kind of question people ask when a story has traveled farther than you intended. That stayed with me. Businesses recover, people recover. But reputation has a longer memory than most people realize, especially in industries where trust is part of the product being sold. I do not celebrate that. I want to be precise about this because it matters. There is no satisfaction in watching your child reduced. There is no version of a mother who looks at her son's diminished circumstances and feels anything clean or simple. What I feel is closer to a sorrow that has made its peace with itself. Grief that has been fully acknowledged and then set down, somewhere it can exist, without requiring constant tending. I think about the Caldwell Avenue building sometimes. It is leased now to a small logistics consulting firm, a woman-owned operation, 2 employees, building something from the ground up. They pay market rate. They have never missed a payment. The building is being used the way a building should be used, by people who understand the value of what they are standing in. I think about the navy bean soup I made that Mother's Day. The pot I filled out of habit, out of hope I had not fully admitted to myself. The smell of it moving through my house all afternoon while the phone stayed silent. I do not make that soup anymore on Mother's Day. I make it in October now, when the weather turns, and it belongs to the season rather than an expectation. I think about the phone in my hand the morning after. I have been asked, in my own mind, in the quiet of my own kitchen, whether I regret making that call. Whether there was another way. Whether a different woman would have absorbed it and moved on, and kept the peace that was never really peace at all. The answer is no. I did not call Curtis Gilchrist to hurt my son. I called him because I finally arrived at a decision that was long overdue. That I deserved to be treated like a person worth considering. Not performed for, not posted about, not used as a contrast to make someone else look better. Actually considered. And if Quincy was not going to make that decision, I was going to make it for myself. Everything that followed, he built with his own hands. The complaint, the lawsuit, the coldness toward his wife, the calls that never once led with an apology. Every bridge that burned, he lit himself. I handed him 60 days and a door that was never fully closed. He chose what to do with both. That phone call changed everything. Not because it destroyed him, because it forced every decision afterward into the open, where other people could finally see it too. Some things can be rebuilt. A business can be rebuilt. A client list can be rebuilt. Even a life can be rebuilt. But there are certain losses that do not return in their original form once they are gone. Trust is one of them. I have my buildings. I have Treadwell. I have Verdell and Woodrow. And the memory of 4 days in Savannah that I will carry for the rest of my life. I have a kitchen that smells like whatever I decide to cook, and a phone that rings when people want to reach me, and a life that belongs to me in every direction I look. The lease ended. The marriage ended. The partnership ended. The excuses ended. And somewhere along the way, my son finally met the consequences of being the man he had chosen to become. As for me, I finally met the woman I should have been protecting all along.